it's impossible to go after her and not look like you don't know what you're doing. So I'm going to do the best. You can just look at this as a break after Liz and then the afternoon. So I am going to talk about recovery. I have, just to kind of begin with, to tell you, for instance, there's a national mental health organization. I won't mention the organization. They have support groups all over the country. They have wonderful support groups all over the country. In fact, I have a few of their support groups at my center in Houston. They do wonderful work, but a little bit less than a year ago, they decided to remove from all of their material related to mental illness the word recovery. They now have a statement that says mental illness are chronic conditions from which you cannot recover. And I said, well, good luck with that message. That's really awesome. So I think they're completely wrong. They will not promote our material anymore because we have the word recovery on there. And so what I want to talk to you today about is recovery. And I want to tell you to begin with, people with serious mental illness do recover. And we need to define what that means, but they are chronic conditions. Stability is the outcome that is most promoted by the system that we have now. And I think that there's so much more than stability for people that are mentally ill. I mean, if I have a chronic condition like diabetes or hypertension or something like that, and the doctor says, well, we're just going to make sure you're stable. I mean, that sounds good if I'm in distress, but once I'm stable, I think I want more than that. And so we're going to talk about what recovery really looks like. Recovery isn't really a thing, it's a process. And so we really have to define recovery. And this is the same conversation I had with this organization. I said, look, absolutely people recover. I can give you any number of examples of people that I work with that recover. In fact, virtually everyone that I work with has recovered, because recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. That is absolutely possible for people who have very serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, you name it. I start out, every client I ever see, every family I ever work with, I always start out by saying, it doesn't matter to me how difficult of a situation you're in right now, you absolutely, or they absolutely can be better than they are today. That's a guarantee. I don't even have to meet them or know their story. I know they can be better than they are today as long as they can get the proper care that they need. And we're going to talk about what that looks like, because the way the system is set up now, again, is not really in a recovery process mode. It's set up in a treatment mode, and you have to have more than just a pill or more than just therapy to be able to our clients about that, to kind of give them an idea of what recovery might look like. So it's one thing for me to tell you it's a process. It's another thing for maybe to tell you kind of what's involved in some of that process. There are more steps in this, but these are kind of larger steps. And you can see the beginning of recovery is hope. If an individual has no hope, if they do not believe that they can get better in any sense, they're stuck where they are. If someone were to tell them, for instance, mental illnesses are chronic conditions in which you cannot recover, I think that's kind of a hope killer, okay? So hope is the engine, it's the fuel that drives the engine of recovery. Okay, so you must have hope. And that's why I believe it's so important for faith communities to be involved in mental health care, because I think the hope that I can give you if I'm not working with you from a faith perspective is that your symptoms will get better. And I'm not sure that the symptoms of your illness will get better. I know your quality of life can get better. I know other things can get better, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm not 100% sure that your symptoms aren't already at a point where they're minimized as much as they can be minimized. But there's a hope that transcends circumstances. There's a hope that goes beyond mental health problems, because you or your loved one is more than a mental health problem. So develop hope, acquire skills for self-care, have a good support network, so forth, till ultimately we're building a meaningful and satisfying life. How often, if you're a person who struggles with a mental health problem or you have a loved one, has the clinician or hopefully the mental health team you have talked about, what do we need to do to get your loved one to a point where they're building a meaningful and satisfying life? Rather than, what do we have to do to get delusions to go away? What do we have to do to very kind of laser focus? I'm not saying that it's not important to do those things. I'm just saying those can't be the outcome or endpoint focus of what we do. So let's talk about recovery. What does that process really look like? And then also let's talk about how does that process affect the relationship of the family with the individual that's recovering, because I think that's very important. One of the most important things for us to do when we're dealing with an individual who has a mental health problem is to have realistic expectations. So when we're talking about recovery from mental health care problems, we are not talking days to weeks. We are talking months to years. Now that's not a bad thing, that's just reality. We need to make sure that we understand what our time frame is, and we have to have realistic expectations. So let's look at kind of a little thing Joe Padilla and I put together on how we describe the recovery process here in these 4 little squares here. Then I'm going to show you how, depending on where the individual is in their process, how that affects where the family is in their relationship with the individual. So to begin with, the individual may be in distress. Oftentimes, a mental health care provider will encounter a person with a mental health problem because they're in distress. And to me, distress is you're not functional. Someone's having to care for you. You can't care for yourself. You may be delusional. You may be suicidal. And in many instances, when you're in distress, there has to be some type of an intervention, and oftentimes in psychiatry, that intervention is an acute hospitalization, probably 4 to 6 days to try to, quote unquote, stabilize you, okay, which is boost you with medication so you're not suicidal anymore, and then give you back to your family, okay? So this is the low end. No one wants to be there, but most people with psychiatric problem, with a mental health issue, will have been at some point in distress, okay? So, let's say we hospitalize the individual, let's say we provide some medication, let's say we then refer them back to their family. Now hopefully we've given them some referrals to mental health care providers, and they are what we might refer to as stable, or they are in a point of stability, meaning that they are not suicidal, they still are not able to function in the sense that they can care for themselves, but they in essence are not a problem. Okay, might we say. The family can care for them. I get up every morning, I make sure he takes his medication. I make sure that he eats. I make sure that, he cleaned himself today and he has proper hygiene, and maybe we go to the park. But I am caring for him in some sense. He is compliant in that he takes the medication. If this individual refuses to take the medication, then they begin to work back towards distress. Okay, so they are, quote unquote, stable, okay? Now, who wants to stay there? Well, that sucks. I mean, there's no other way to say it. I mean, that's I don't want to be there. I want better than that, okay? And I don't just want better than that for me. I want better than that for everybody, okay? Who wants that? Now, if you read a lot of psychiatric texts, like I have, stability is the primary outcome that's promoted. Now, stability is great. It's much better than distress. It's much better than being delusional. It's much better than being suicidal. It's much better than being other things. But stability is not enough, period. If you take anything away from my talk, write that down. It's not enough. And if your mental health care provider says it is enough, you need to find another mental health care provider. Okay? Because it's just not enough. So now, from stability, we're going to move to function. Remember what the back end of those steps were of building a meaningful quality of life, engaging in the community. So function is this individual is now beginning to take partnership or take over a part of their own care. So instead of me getting up every day and making sure that my loved one is taking their medication, he makes sure that he takes his own medication. He lets me know when he's having some symptom breakthrough. He is beginning to set some goals for himself. He is engaged in his care. He's beginning to engage in the family. He's engaged in responsibilities of the family. We are beginning to have more of a familial relationship as opposed to me, as I'm going to show you in a minute, being his caregiver. Okay? So he's beginning to function at a higher level. And then finally, purpose. This is the back end of those steps I just showed you. This individual has taken over full command and control of their care. They make their own appointments. They take their medication. They call their psychiatrist when they're having a problem. They may begin a part-time job, going back to school part-time. Maybe they're moving out on their own and doing their own thing. And I know you may be sitting there thinking, there is no way that my loved one could ever get to that point. And I'm absolutely telling you, I don't know that they could, but I see them do it all the time. I have a client who has a schizoaffective disordered daughter. She's 32 years old. She has to be cared for at this point. She's not, she's somewhere kind of here on the back end of this. When I first met that family, I said, I have last schizoaffective disorder client I met with. After several years, she was able to go back to college, finish, got a master's degree, and now has her own counseling practice. The mother turned to me and said, that's not possible. That's what we've been told, that's not possible. I said, of course it's possible. She's not even the only one that I've ever had that did that. Now, is it possible for your daughter? I don't know that. We have to work with her, but is it possible for her to be better than right there? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So now, you get a sense of this process. Now, is it always linear? No. It's like this, and like this, and like that. That's it, okay? So it's not, if anybody's going to tell you, like, I'm going to do this, and they're going to go there, and they're going to go there, it's just it's like a ball of string that you undo, but it's got two ends, okay? It's just a mess. But that's okay. But you have to understand, that's the realistic expectation. Your context is this. This is what you want to see. You're always gauging back against this. Well, where is she today? She's here. Okay, well, where was she last week? Well, she was here. She's making progress. Okay, well, now she's here. She's been doing really well for 3 months, but she's kind of slipped back. Okay, well, what did we do before to get her to this point? What do we add in? It's a process, okay? Once a person gets into this range right here, they usually can maintain that for years at a time before they're going to struggle again. It's a chronic condition. If you have diabetes and you do nothing about it, you'll die. If you have diabetes and you don't take your medication, but you did change your diet, you'll get sick. There's lifestyle changes, there's support that's needed. It's a chronic, same thing with hypertension. We can go through a whole litany of other examples. It's the same thing here, it's a process, okay? Now, let's talk about the family. I have families come in all the time. Our daughter, has whatever. And now she won't have anything to do with us, and I try to give her advice, and she doesn't listen to me, she won't take her medication. Well, that's because depending on where a person with mental health problem is in their recovery, depends on what your relationship with it is. So if you're the mother of this person who has schizophrenia, and he's down here, and you want to be his mom, caregiver. That's the level of the relationship that you're at, okay? You are, in essence, a very intimate nurse, okay? And so when he says, because he's delusional, I hate you, I don't want to have anything to do with you, I know you just put me in this place because I was never the good son, and you're part of this conspiracy that I know is going on, you don't walk out of the room and fall apart. You walk out of the room and you say, my son's brain is disordered and he doesn't understand what he's doing. Because the nurse doesn't walk out of the room after he cusses her out and says, don't bring that poison back in here anymore and try to give it to me. She doesn't walk out of the room and cry in the hallway because she knows he's sick and she doesn't take it personally. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm saying that's what you have to understand. It's as if you walked in the room and he has diabetes and his pancreas is not generating insulin and doing what it's supposed to do, and you walk out in the hallway and you start crying and go, I just wish his blood sugar would listen to me because I'm his mother. I know it's a little bit of a difference because it's not as personal, but there's no difference in the sense of, you're in essence saying, I wish his brain would just realize I'm his mother and he'd stop being the way he is. His reality is that you are part of that conspiracy and he's speaking out of his reality. That's not your reality. Your reality is you're his caregiver right now. And as his caregiver, you want to make sure he's safe, healthy, getting his treatment. That's what you're doing right now. You have to step out of being the mother and you have to just be the caregiver. And if you'll do that, it won't be as personal to you in that moment. Now, as that individual moves into stability, you become a manager of his illness. You make sure the medication's there every day. You make sure there's, food on the table, and so he comes in and eats. You make sure he has a clean room. You're managing his life, okay? You're still not his mom. You still can't sit down in the evening and have those wonderful talks that you want to have, or let's put a movie in, let's watch Old Yellow and cry together. You can't, it's not going to happen. And you have to say to yourself, he's not at the point yet that I can begin to have that kind of relationship with him again. It doesn't mean that your motivation isn't that you are his mother. That's what your motivation is. It's the acting out of it. It isn't that you're sad that your child is ill. Of course you're sad that your child is ill. Okay? So think about this for a minute. If your child has cancer and they're in the hospital, Do you worry about how they interact with you, or do you worry about trying to get their cancer better? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's the thing. You need to worry about you need to focus on the illness for the time, not on, he cussed me out last week again, I can't do this anymore. Okay? We're not talking about a substance use problem here. We're talking about a serious mental illness. Okay? We can talk about substance use issues another time. And that's been a problem. From the substance use arena, we've gotten a lot of we need to give them tough love. Well, you can't tough love bipolar disorder out of somebody, okay? Or schizophrenia or depression. You know, so tough love isn't going to work here. Boundaries are appropriate. But boundaries are set up so people can be successful, not to punish them. So you manage. Now, they're moving into function. Now you become a partner, okay? Hey, Mom, I need more medication. Can you stop by CVS on the way home and pick up my stuff? I called in, and it's waiting for me, okay? Sure, son, absolutely. Hey, Mom, can we have ribs this week? I love ribs. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, now the person's beginning to engage the family. The person's probably given some responsibilities in the family. Maybe they're responsible for the pet now. Maybe they mow the yard. Maybe they do whatever. But they are beginning to be part of the family again as a functional individual, and they're partnering with another person, with this family member, in their recovery. And then finally, as they get into purpose and they're beginning to generate that meaningful and quality life, you're their family member again. You get to have conversations with them that have nothing to do with their illness. Now, I'll tell you, as a marker, that's probably the greatest marker for a family to realize where their loved one is. If you can have a conversation with your loved one, a meaningful conversation, and it has nothing to do with their illness, or you can have a conversation with someone at your church about your son, and you never mention the fact that they're bipolar disorder because what you're talking about has nothing to do with it, then they're down here. If all you're ever doing is talking about an illness, then they're down here. That's a great gauge for a family to realize. And stop and think for a minute. Do you talk about your child, or do you talk about their illness? If you talk about their illness, they probably are low in the recovery process. They're probably not fully functional. They're probably not engaging their care. Those types of things. Unfortunately, as I said, the system that we have now, which really isn't a system, it's a set of disjointed resources. Wonderful resources, but disjointed resources that are hard to access and are oftentimes driven by insurance payments. This is basically what Joe D and I refer to as the treatment box. You get trapped in the treatment box. And that is, I'm sick, I go get treated, I should be better. I'm not better, I go get treated, I should be better. So what I'm going to tell you is this. One of the biggest problems in relationship to this that I work with families is our absolute obsession with medication as the end-all, be-all treatment, the curative agent, the miraculous dust that will cure mental illness. It doesn't. Okay? I mean, I have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, which, whatever that's worth. But it means I know all the different structures of the brain, and I had to read all kinds of stuff that you never did. And I can tell you right now, I can tell you and sit here and give you theories of why certain mental illnesses exist, but we do not know why they exist. We know what's wrong in the brain, but we don't know why it's wrong. And when you don't know why something is wrong, you cannot treat the problem. You can only give a medication that minimizes the symptoms that express themselves. So we can give you a medication that will stabilize your moods, but it may or may not be affecting what's wrong. Does that make sense? A may be wrong, and B may be related, so I give you a medication that affects B, and it makes A look like it's better. That may be what's happening, okay? So as long as we're working at it from that perspective, there is no cure, but there is recovery. And we need to stop thinking about treatment. We need to think broader. Because when I say treatment, almost everybody thinks about medicine. Because treatment to most of us is, my kid gets strep throat, and I take him to the urgent care, and they swab his throat, strep throat, antibiotic, no more strep throat. That's because the antibiotic, it kills what's causing the strep throat. We can't do that yet with a mental health problem. So, that being said, what I'm going to suggest to you, I know I'm a little contrary to what Dan put up here earlier, but he went 3, I got 4. So my onion is bigger than his onion. But the thing is that I'm going to suggest to you that if you'll back away for a minute and realize that medication is a wonderful tool, but it's only one tool in a tool belt. Okay? It's a great tool, and in many instances it's a tool, it's a necessary tool, but it's only one tool. Okay? And so we have to look at a person holistically. Okay, so Dan talked about that a little bit. I see people as kind of 4 parts because when I look at that, I say spiritual, mental, physical, relational. I know that when you have mental health problems, you're having physical issues. I know that's a brain disorder. I know that affects you mentally. I know that affects your relationships, and I know that affects you spiritually. I get that from Luke 2:52. Jesus grew in wisdom, mental, and stature, physical, and in favor with God. Spiritual and man, relational. So that's how I look at people. Now, it could be 50 layers, or it could be 2 layers, I don't know. But just look at them as more than a brain. Look at them as the effects of a brain disorder, okay? So now, if I'm going to engage a client, I want to engage them at all levels. Because this is what's going to happen if I only engage them at one level. So you come in and you're depressed, and I give you an SSRI. Which I can't because that would be illegal because I have a PhD. But let's say I did, okay? And nobody had a problem with that. I give you an SSRI, and your depressive symptoms get better, whatever that might be, okay? Because a lot of times that's the other problem. There's no outcome measure. Whatever that might be, they get better. You feel better, okay? Now, and then, are you done?
No.
Is that it? No, you're not done. Yeah.
What is an SSRI?
Oh, it's an antidepressant. It's kind of antidepressant. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So, I'm sorry, not everybody has a PhD in behavioral neuroscience here. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm really bad about doing that. I like throw things out, and I'm like, so I taught way too many college classes. I don't care if they know it or not. I just throw it right in. But are you better? Well, you're probably better mood-wise, but what about the relationships with that depressive episode you've been going through affects? What about your spiritual life? What do you think God is punishing? What about all the negative thoughts you've been having related to your depression? Do they just all go away automatically? That's the treatment box. So you go back to the physician, and he or she says, oh, well, you say, well, I'm better, but okay, well, let's do what? Give you up the dose. Because also all we're doing is we're just focusing right here. It's the same thing if I showed up at a church and I said, Pastor, I'm really depressed. And he said, well, brother, depression is a sin. God says we should always be joyful. So you need to start studying this, and you need to start praying more. I'm going to pray over you. You're just focusing on one aspect of our being. God made us multi-part being, okay? So what I'm saying is we take a holistic approach, and your mood issues, let's say we've got them better, but they're not great. Well, we might start focusing on mental issues. We might start focusing on relational issues. You can always be making progress in your recovery. Do you see what I'm saying? Because we're more than just a neurotransmitter that's out of whack. That neurotransmitter being out of whack or whatever is going to affect all these other things. I see it a lot with people that have bipolar disorder, and then they have a late diagnosis in life. So they have bipolar disorder, it's never been diagnosed. They go through one destroyed relationship after another. No one quite understands what's wrong. They're diagnosed with bipolar disorder. They get some relief through treatment, and now they look back across the destruction of their life from the illness, and most of those people go, that bipolar disorder is just an excuse.
Yes.
Okay, well, those are relational issues that need to be dealt with. Okay? I mean, if those aren't dealt with, is that person ever going to be able to recover?
No.
See, that's the thing. We have to deal with the whole person. So what does that look like? Oh, I should say, again, back to a spiritual aspect of this. I think hope, again, is the driving force, the fuel of recovery. So faith communities have an incredible opportunity if you do nothing more than instill in your people the hope that they can be better, the hope that if you will go see this person I'm referring you to, the hope if you will attend the support groups that we have here at the church, whatever, but a hope that God is active in your life and that there is an opportunity for change and that this isn't your fault, this is an illness. You've set the groundwork for recovery. Where are they going to get that other than from the faith community? I mean, a psychiatrist, wonderful people, they don't have a lot of time for that. I mean, again, mental health problems are different than other illnesses. You don't, if I have an infection, I don't have to have the hope that I'm going to get better for you to make me better. But if I have a mental health problem, I really do need to believe that I can change, to set the groundwork for that. But you see that in other things. Obviously, a positive attitude, a hopeful attitude is very therapeutic if you have a very serious chronic illness. And so faith communities are a great place for that hope to be built. This is a favorite verse of mine. It talks about God can make the valley of trouble into a door of hope. I mean, that's a hope that transcends circumstances. That's something that a mental health care provider may or may not be able to instill in you. They may or may not be able to build that kind of relationship with you. But that is the call of a faith community, is to talk about the hope that we have in God. All right, so what does a holistic approach to recovery look like? People ask me that all the time. You say do a holistic approach. What does that mean? Are you like a supplement guy? Do you use a lot of supplements? I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. Although my wife would probably like me to talk about that, but I'm not talking about, when I say holistic, I mean a whole body, whole person. So I'm talking about, to me, those 4 different aspects. So what you want to do is you want to look at your treatment plan, which I pray you have, okay? And you want to ask yourself, am I being engaged at the different levels of my being or my loved one's being? So for instance, physical. You will see that medication is just one component. And there are probably more aspects to physical, but these are 5 things that we normally will interact with a person about. Sleep is one of the biggest concerns that most of my clients have. They can't sleep either because their medication won't let them sleep or their illness won't let them sleep. And so if you sleep better, your brain chemistry is better. You feel better. You're able to engage your care better. It sounds like you're thinking, well, my kid is schizophrenic. The last thing I need to worry about is sleep. I got to get some medication in him so he won't be delusional. Well, let me just tell you, you'd be shocked if you did a little sleep hygiene with that individual, set up a sleep plan, and they slept better, because it completely alters serotonin levels in the brain. When I was in graduate school, we used to do studies with rats. One of the ways that we depleted serotonin levels in rats was we kept rats awake 24 hours a day. You put them on a little circulating platform in a water bath, so if they fall asleep, they fall into the water, and so they all night long have to kind of keep going like this to stay awake. Their serotonin levels in their brain just completely depleted. You can get them almost down to 0. Just for no sleep, just by not having any sleep. So imagine that on top of your schizophrenia. So the physical needs. What about the spiritual needs? Okay, well, we talked about hope. What about who you are in God, how God sees you, purpose in life? Where does your purpose come from? Your purpose doesn't come from whether you can go to college or not. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, your son may have a disorder that doesn't allow him to ever finish college. You know what? That is not the purpose in life, is to go to college. Yeah, I got all kind of degrees. I know that. You may say it's easy for me to say. But the thing is that I promise you that is not your purpose in life. Your purpose in life is so much higher than that. And so you have to talk about where that comes from. Spiritual growth, community, mental needs. You see the therapy, again, is just one tool in there. And then finally, relational needs. What do those things look like? How do you resolve conflict? How do you help others? Those types of things. So this is, to me, a holistic approach, okay? If you look at your care, and your care is only that, or maybe just that and just that, it's not enough to recover. You're just going to get so far. So, in closing, let me just tell you, people do get better. I see it all the time. And I'm not doing something magic. I'm not doing something. To me, this is common sense, because it's based on how God has created us. If you want to see this in an actionable form, go out to the Grace Alliance booth out here. They've got a manual called Thrive. This is all laid out in there. It's almost like a workbook. It's actually a curriculum that we use at the Hope and Healing Center also. It can help you kind of get started on that. But people with mental health problems do recover and do have quality lives. And please, please do not let anyone tell you that they don't. Thank you for your time.
You know, I just love hearing all the speakers because I learn something every single time that I hear them. And Matt's one of the best. He goes all over the country talking to groups, and we were just lucky to get him to come over to San Antonio and do this today. Our next speaker is Representative Garnet Coleman, and he is from District 147 in Houston. And Garnet's going to talk to you a little bit about his personal life, what his journey has been, but also know that Speaker Joe Strauss has formed a select House committee on mental health, and Garnet is one of the members, and they're meeting this year to help prepare themselves for the next legislative session. And I was telling Garnet last night, I feel a whole lot better having somebody on that select committee who has had a mental health disorder and can speak from firsthand experience. So let's welcome Representative Garnet Coleman.
Well, I don't have any slides. I guess I'm the slide. First of all, this is a wonderful 2 days of learning and understanding and work for this community. And I didn't get a chance to do it yesterday, but Bexar County, since I'm County Affairs Chair, I have to use counties, not cities. Bexar County is probably one of the most innovative and community fulfilling places. Bexar County comes to the legislature and asks for permission to do something, and then they go and do it. They don't ask for the money. They say, we'll take care of that, just let us do it. And I think we've made a lot of progress, and I've seen Bexar County make a lot more progress than other places because of the can-do spirit of the people here in Bexar County. So I just wanted to really lay that out. And before I talk a little bit about me, 2 sessions ago, the last session, I can't remember, but we modeled Haven for Hope to be replicated in the state of Texas and all the other cities that didn't have something like that. And $25 million was allocated for the biennium to create these same models. So Houston has an equivalent model now, other places do, and then we'll continue to have money to make sure that every city and every county can, particularly starting with the large counties, can have what you have. Because it's such a big deal. And it didn't take much for me to go, as a committee chair, to say that this is the model we should follow. And so there's hope in that regard too, because we're putting money into circumstances and getting the community to come together to help fund that, just as you have done. And I think it has a lot of promise for the future for people with behavioral health issues and not, people don't have a place to live. So I wanted to let you know that you're the model for that all over the state of Texas, and the new rounds of funding are going on now, and of course, Haven for Hope can get funding too from that initiative. So, okay, now that I've done that commercial to tell you how good you are, but it's true, I wouldn't say that it wasn't true. Some of you all already probably have lived either with a family member or yourself with issues of diagnosable mental illnesses that defy other people's understanding. And so one of the more difficult things is to tell someone, or even if you stigma or whatever else, to explain what you're actually feeling and what's actually going on with you, because it doesn't make sense to them. And as much as we educate folks, it still doesn't make sense to them. So let's start there. So like most people who've had depression, and I'm diagnosed with bipolar disorder, this stuff starts about age 16, 15, 14, somewhere around in there, but most people have real problems once they start after high school, whatever it is that they're doing, and those stressors that occur. And for me, you know, one of the things that if you're a productive person, and everything kind of goes well, and then when it doesn't, that makes you nervous anyway. So the first time I was hospitalized was I was age 16. And I didn't know what was going on. My parents didn't. My father was an OB-GYN, so he was a doctor, but that doesn't mean he understood these circumstances when you're dealing with your child. And so the most way I can explain that through finally finishing college is that I basically lived the cycles of depression, mania, long. So it took me 11 years to finish college. So you can finish. And I want you to know that. You can. I paid for 3 college educations, my family did, but I finally did get there. And it was important, but it also shows what the illness does in terms of productivity. So you could look at my college transcript, a semester of A's, B's, you know, decent college work, to a withdrawal. Another semester of A's, whatever, to a withdrawal. Another one, and it just like that all the way through. Barely got out of high school for the same reasons, but I think it was even worse then because being an adolescent, you got problems anyway. And then all of a sudden you got these other problems. And then all of a sudden you're very different from your peers. Because at that time, you know, this was the 70s. Okay. This was the 70s, late 70s. To me, it didn't seem that long ago, but a very different world then. And people are cruel. You know, if you're not moving along with your peers, they can be some very, very cruel people. And it didn't bother me so much. It's just that I wasn't progressing like my peers. And it mattered for some reason. It did to them, it did to the society, you know, around me. We didn't think of life like that as whether you're alive or dead. We thought about it as whether your progress is not happening. So that kind of thing continued into college. So how did I get out of this place? I'm not out of it. That's how I got out of it, because I'm not out of it, but I'm in a better place. And I want to talk about the people who were so helpful, because I think everybody needs someone to turn to, and the right kind of medications as opposed to alcohol and drugs, which mostly people use to mask whatever it is that's going on with them, and I did. I mean, I didn't consider myself to be necessarily an alcoholic, but I was a 8 martini drinker, you know, so I guess that maybe is or isn't, I don't know, but 8 martinis, every sit, I didn't sit and drink all the time, but I'm gonna tell you, when I sat and drank, I drank. And so it's interesting because you don't know that's why you're doing it. You know you're doing it, but you don't know necessarily that that's why you're doing it. And the reason I know that's why I'm doing it, once I got medication and everything, I don't drink anymore. I have no desire to. And it's not something that I did because I'm like great or anything like that. The reason I was drinking went away. So I didn't need to drink. And so that's a very important thing, because regardless, even if I didn't have a mental illness, it's the other activities that probably would have killed me before the mental illness, so I don't have that to deal with anymore. But the people who were very helpful, I went to University of St. Thomas in Houston, and also at other universities I went to like 5. Does that sound familiar? so going to about 5, but the counseling and testing centers, even in the 80s, and were probably the best places to go for understanding that is right there on a college campus. And they're still there on a college campus, and mental illness has changed on college campuses in that they most recognize that that's a big part of their job now, to help someone get to the right treatment and right care because of changes right at the beginning of college for a lot of people. And how do you get them to where they can be successful? We have some work to do on that in Texas right now in our public universities. But being at a place like St. Thomas was very nurturing, small, and access to the counseling and testing center was very good for me. Even though it still took me a long time to finish it, that's why I wouldn't have finished otherwise. Also, having a support network, and that's where the faith part of this comes in. I'm a good Episcopalian, baptized Episcopalian. That's weird in Texas, believe me. So my rector, as I went along, I got married and I was very young, 23. I was at a space where life, again, just wasn't working. And I went to my rector and asked if he knows someone that I could go to. Now, because first I turned to going back to church, because I just couldn't figure it out, you know? And I felt so comfortable going to him and he recommending someone, and important at that time, that would take a sliding scale. Because, you know, at that time, if you admitted you had a diagnosed with mental illness and it was on your insurance, everybody would know, and if everybody knew, you would never get a job, or you'd never keep a job. So even if you used it, still, it can be very expensive, and to get treatment, and you've got to go every week. That can be a lot of money. Today, it is a lot of money. But the sliding scale was really helpful. And someone who understood life today, at that time, today, was important as well. Because even though we think people know us, it's hard to know us. We're all different. And many of the things that we go through are triggered by emotional things in our lives that actually trigger the mental illnesses that we're predisposed to, as you already know. So one of the ways to stay well is to actually move through those issues that we all have, family issues, like talk substance abuse, whatever the case may be, and it's a long journey. Because it is a journey, because you have to dig back down deep in there. So that was extremely helpful. And that with going to church, I got confirmed at 28. So that ought to tell you something. And it was very helpful. I mean, there are certain people who I credit with saving my life. And my rector was one of them. And my church is one of them. But still, life goes on. I ran for the legislature. I know this is kind of weird. I already knew that I had bipolar disorder, so it wasn't really an issue for me. But I wasn't well yet. Can I say it like that? I was still living the life of things go really well, things go really badly, things go really well, things go really badly. So I got elected in '91, and I was doing pretty good. Things didn't go really badly until 1994. Now I had my days where I couldn't get to the office. You know, that didn't change anything. Actually, it was a little easier. But my father died, and if you talk to a man, he's going to tell you he has issues with his father. It don't matter. You do. Because we know we do. And that's just the reality of it. It depends on what type of father you have. If your father is one of the ones who never thinks you do anything right, it's very difficult to develop a relationship. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They just want the best for you. And a lot of people believe negative reinforcement is the best way to get you to a positive place. So we didn't understand, coming from a black community, education is the number one thing. And I know it is in a lot of communities, but it's different. Because with my father's family, you know, to get to medical school, when you couldn't go to a medical school in Texas if you're black, those were the things that made the difference. That education is what creates equalization and opportunity. It still does. So those were very big things. So in all those years, him not being able to understand the psychiatric side of it, because, you know, those days and still now, psychiatry is not considered to be a very high and noble medical profession. The other doctors won't tell you that, but it is. Just so you know, it's voodoo. So that's another reason why we have to make sure that people understand that these are physical illnesses and that medication works, so it's not voodoo. Because if it can be fixed with a pill, it's just like something else. But yeah, it was a real issue for us. So those issues I had to get through. And I did. And that meant that the triggers of having continued episodes of depression, I was able to deal with those. But it took a long time. I think I'm still in psychotherapy, so I started in psychotherapy really diligently at age 28. I'm 54. And I think that component of dealing with mental illness is understated and underappreciated in terms of how you recover and stay recovered. If it was just pills, for me, it wouldn't work. I mean, it just wouldn't. I mean, you know, it's distressing enough to have a chronic illness, but to not have somebody to talk to that truly understands what you're going through, and that you're going to need tune-ups. So I'm in a tune-up phase right now, that you know, I find myself going back more and more, trying to get my medication right. But you know, I'm 54 years old, I turned 50, I'm crazy anyway. You know, I've been in the Texas legislature 25 years, and I'm just trying to figure out, well, what's the next so many years gonna be? And then to add insult to injury, I have 3 chronic illnesses, so I think it's important for people to understand comorbidity. You know, you hear the statistics about people with mental illness and diabetes. I have type 2 diabetes. I have non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver. So it's really funny when we talk about brain chemicals, all 3 of these have a brain chemical deal, because they all determine what you filter out, and glucose is just as important in your head as serotonin. And the changes in having those 3 illnesses, actually the comorbidity sent me in a spiral. All my medications stopped working. This was in 2013. I hadn't been in a place like that in a long time. I used to weigh 205 pounds. I mean, I went heavy, but I lost a lot of weight, and not on purpose. So, you know, these are the types of things that compound those issues that we talk about, and having experienced that really makes me know that that's why people's lives end up being shorter. And because you got to get all that balance now, whether it's insulin, whether it's you know, the medication for the liver, you freak out first of all on this liver stuff, whether or not you need a liver transplant. You know, they found like some cancerous nodules, and I didn't realize probably all of you all have these, not just me. But you know, all of these things change, and it creates this idea of looking at life moving forward. I'm like, mental illness, okay, I got that. I take my pills in the morning. I try to keep away from the triggers. But you know, food is an interesting thing. I love food. And with diabetes, you can eat with mental illness, you can't eat with diabetes. I mean, try to go to any fast food restaurant, you can't eat that on the menu, nothing. So I say all that to say that chronic illnesses and comorbidity, which are extremely common with people with diagnosable mental illness, are true issues as well. And that's why moving forward, having co-located or primary care and mental health care together is extremely important. Extremely important. Because that way, people can get out front. If they're dealing well, starting to deal well with medication and therapy with mental illness, they can get out front of those issues when it comes to physical chronic illnesses. So I said I'm in a tune-up. You know, that was, I tell people all the time, and I believe in recovery. I'm sorry, I had to do quotes. Because I came at it another way. I came at it that I can manage my illness, but it's never going away. Now, other people, that makes, I'm hopeful with that. I mean, I'm good with that. I don't need another word to know that I can, if that's all it takes, that's good. And to tell somebody, look, you know, shoot, I've been basically dealing with this since I was 17 years old, and I'm still here. And guess what? I'm a member of the legislature. I was in a mental hospital for 30 days and got reelected. So, but most importantly is that yes, you're going to always have to have tune-ups. And when it comes to medication, I'm on my third cocktail, not my first. And when my medication failed 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, I was scared to death. Because it took so long to get to that combination. Because it's trial and error. I mean, it really is, y'all. And I didn't know how long it would take, what tweak it would take to get me back where it actually worked at all. And in particular, it's the antidepressants mostly, so it's not, you know, but in that period of time, I probably almost killed myself. It was a 7-day period of time. I'm pretty sure I would have. I have good friends who came and got me out of my place in Austin. But I hadn't felt like that in, goodness gracious, almost 20 years. And I knew immediately, and I tell my mother this, you know, I said, Mom, I'm one drug failure away from death. I said, so she goes, huh? I said, no, I'm just telling you. I mean, it's not like it's a big deal. I mean, what am I going to do? But the reality is that's the truth. Because in that 7-day period of time, I decompensated so fast that with my medication not working at all, I never left the, you know this, never left the bed for 7 days. 7 days, something like that. Plus I was losing all this weight, losing weight because I never left the bed and ate. And I got to the point where I was hopeless again. So being hopeless is a constant challenge, but when your medication isn't working, there's really nothing to do about being hopeless and suicidal. Not that I was running around, I had a plan. No, I didn't have a plan, but I mean, the reality was life looked better not being in it than it did being in it. So that was very clear to me. And when I went, after getting elected to the legislature, when I went to the Menninger Clinic, the reason I went is, you know, I left home. I got in the car. I'm 30 years, you know, married, 30 years old. I got in the car and drove off and didn't come back for 3 months. My wife, they were all looking for me and you know, I did what I call the Garnet Coleman Texas hotel tour. So I would move from hotel room to hotel room with using my credit card, you know, paranoid as all get out, knowing that I did this once and then I did it again. So it was 6 months total. But at the end of that, just like 3 years ago, I knew that this was all going to end in me being dead. And that's just the reality. Once you can think clearly, you know. Okay, if you're going to go away and be in hotel rooms for 6 months, what's the next thing? You're going to get on a plane and go away and be in hotels someplace else? Or why don't you skip all that? Why not, just skip all that, not be here to have to do that? So I know, again, because of that, that treatment works. It works. We just have to get people the treatment that works. And medications work. And people have to learn how to be patient to get to the point and have the right support network around them to when it gets to work. And we have to be honest with the people around us, like I am with my mother, because she's my mama, you know? She wants the best for me and all of that. But I wanted her to understand, don't think I'm cured. Yeah, I'm not. Now, if I function, yeah, I function really well. I function better than some other people, quite frankly. But the reality is, it's like with anything. We're maintaining our wellness. And we're making sure that we do all the things that we've been taught to do to stay well. So what I've been doing since I went to Menninger and all this time up to now until my tune-up time that I'm in, basically is following the directions of a relapse prevention plan. And they work. You know, some people can gut it up and get into situations that are really bad for them emotionally. I can't. I have to avoid them. It's not wrong to avoid something. If you know your system drives you crazy, don't talk to it. You know, I'm like, I love you, but I can't talk to you. But it's true. Some people, for me, it's, you know, close, intense family issues. You know, that deal with the past. They send me over, right? I can't deal with it. But there's no problem. I don't need to deal with them. I need to make sure that I'm not getting in a situation that's going to drive me quickly into depression. I mean, real fast. Now, the legislation doesn't depress me, although it should. So it's interesting because we all know what our different triggers are that, you know, really send us into spirals. And the idea is to not get into that spiral. So the relapse prevention plans are there to avoid things. You know, it's the difference between avoiding it and dying. I mean, I think I'd avoid it. So I had the luxury of being in the Texas legislature. I was saying this yesterday. Part of my team of people, you know, my affirming people, you can kick me in my ass people, you can tell me you're acting funny, are you taking your medication, you know, all of these folks that are around, you know, I had Pete Laney was one of my you can kick me in my ass people. You can ask me, are you on your medication? Is there something wrong? And I won't bark at you. So having a team like that in the workplace was really good. Texas legislature is a really good place. Pete Lane's a really good man. And so this is 1995. But it still works today. We do it automatically after we put our first plan together. But we know who will listen. We know who will call bullshit. We know who will, you know, make sure that they'll come help you out of an initial circumstance. So in this last three years ago, my very good friend, you know, he came and got me out of the play. I mean, he literally, you know, came and got me out of there and brought a doctor over and did all of that. And these are folks who, they're part of my stay alive team and have been for 25, 30 years. And that gives me a lot of hope. And I always will need that. So I say that the relapse prevention plan and having this group of people who are involved in this with you is extremely important. It doesn't matter if it's a family member, it doesn't matter who it is. Just that you respect them and they respect you. But mostly that you respect them. Because you're giving them permission to keep you alive, when the last thing you want to do is be alive. So that has been incredibly strong. So I tell you all these things because, you know, to me it's sort of matter of fact now. Okay, well, you know, I can forget I have a mental illness. It's not even, you know, unless the medication starts messing up, I do. I know I have diabetes. I mean, I'm clear about that one. But unless something happens that changes the treatment and all of those things, I don't think about it. Take medication in the morning and keep going. And what I know is that that's probably the case with many people. They just don't tell you. Because they never told anybody that they had a diagnosable mental illness. But we need to let the people know who don't see the folks who are thriving with mental illness and having the necessary treatment, that there is hope, and it's real. And essentially, for the last, sometimes 24 years, 25 years, I think I've had periods of real depression, maybe less than once a year. I'm sure it's less than once a year. And if I did have them, they're short. 2 days. They're not 6 months. And that is a combination of good treatment, all of those things that are necessary to stay well. And after a while, you don't even, like I said, you don't even recognize that's what you're doing. You're doing it. It's wired into the process. Now I can tell you I'm on the diagnosable mental illness scale, I'm on the better side than most. Because there are extreme difficulties dealing with psychoses, with, things that really are debilitating. And it's very difficult to find medications that work, to stay on medications, to be able to afford it, to get to that place, but people get to that place. And I know that as a society, looking at the number of people here, that we clearly are waking up. I know the Texas legislature did. This is going to sound bad. Unfortunately, it took 22 children to die in Connecticut for us to, but the reality is that we did. And that's important, and the reason why we're still doing it is Joe Strauss and Julie Strauss. And we are making progress in a place that, in 2003, we cut half the money that went to mental health treatment. Half. We took mental health treatment out of the Children's Health Insurance Program. It's very interesting. Life is very interesting. So now we need to get to the second phase of this. We deal with things that we all can collectively understand. But we're not, do we deal with borderline personality disorder? No. Because that's not in people's, you can't hear it, you can't deal with it with medication only. That's what requires cognitive behavioral therapy and psychotherapy. So those are the things that are incredibly expensive. I have a very good friend's daughter who has borderline personality disorder, and the treatment for 1.5 years was $100,000. Because it requires a living change, and it's all residential mostly, and then it's also all psychotherapy. $100,000. So, does the Texas legislature understand what borderline personality disorder is? No, they don't know. Does a family who even has health insurance, are they able to get their child treated for borderline personality disorder? No. Suicide among women, particularly women with borderline personality disorder, is so high. So we're at that next phase of how do we help deal with all of the problems in the circumstance, but we have to deal with the disorder side of this. The disorder side of this is PTSD, eating disorders, all of these same things that kill people, but there are no pills for them. And so we have to get to that understanding. So that's where I am in my work in the legislature is, okay, we need to get to the next phase. Let's get this other stuff right. Let's make sure people have access to the medications, but people have to have access to psychotherapy, because if they do not, there's no change in where they are. So we're going to work on that together coming in this next session of the legislature. I look forward to working with you on that. And thank you very much for letting me come out and talk to you.
Thank you so much, Representative Don Coleman. What a wonderful example of allowing his life to inform his work, and what a powerful story and work that it is that he's called to. And so now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who also has allowed her life to inform her work. And I want to tell you that we would not be able to have this conference without the life and work of Kay Warren. Kay's own life has led her on a journey, and she has allowed that to inform the work that she does. She is the co-founder of Saddleback Church in California. She is a longtime advocate for those on the margins, people with mental illness, with HIV, lots of those kinds of causes, and we are really indebted to her. She's an author, she's a minister, she's a wife, a mother, a grandmother. So please welcome Kay Warren.
I am so glad to be a part of this conversation with you in San Antonio today. I travel a lot and speak to conferences where people represent all the different elements of society, and to see so many of you here, civic leaders, the medical healthcare profession, those of you living with mental illness, church leaders, everybody, to see you all here, it's exciting. In fact, while I'm kind of getting myself going here, if you need to stretch, move around, wave your hands, stand up, it's okay. You're sitting in the dark, so you won't distract me. If you see, I knew that some of you needed to stand, so go ahead, stand, stretch. But to see you, here's the great part about all of you being here, is that what you are doing not only gives hope to people, but it can actually save lives. And if you really believe that your being here can save a life, you're going to pay such close attention to everything that is said, because you know that what you, as the community of San Antonio, as you come together, the difference that you can make in people's lives. Sometimes people ask me, how did I get to be an advocate for people living with mental illness? Well, I have to tell you, I didn't really choose to become an advocate for people living with mental illness. It chose me. 3.5 years ago, when my beautiful son, my youngest son, Matthew, who had lived with mental illness since he was a little boy, finally hit that brick wall of intractable mental illness for the last time, and he took his life. His suffering was immense. He had lived with, when he was 7 years old, he was diagnosed with clinical depression. It went from there to ADHD, to panic disorder. By the time he was 11, it was early onset bipolar disorder, suicidal ideation. When he became a high schooler, he also added OCD and major depressive disorder. And when in the last 1.5 years of his life, the last diagnosis that was given to him was borderline personality disorder. So as you can imagine, his life was tortured. He lived in torment almost every single day of his life. And when he finally felt that there was no hope for change, that nothing was ever going to be any different, that he had gone to the last treatment, taken the last medication, talked to the last therapist, when he had done all of those things, watched his peers begin to live their lives, get married, have children, finish college, and he felt himself stuck in this stage of perpetual illness, and that nothing was ever going to be any different for him. He hit that wall. And he took his life. And as a family, we were crushed and completely devastated by Matthew's death. We had spent so many years doing everything that we could possibly think of to do, everything that we could possibly think of that might bring help and relief and wholeness to our beautiful boy. We had tried. And we were crushed. But as my husband has said many, many times, it is out of our greatest pain often comes our greatest life message. And that is true for us. We decided that we were not going to waste the pain that we had gone through of living with someone that we love so dearly with a mental illness and then losing him to suicide. we decided that we're not going to waste that. So I became an advocate for people living with mental illness, not by choice as much as by pain. But I want to share with you some of the hope that I've learned in these 3.5 years. I want to share with you how the faith community, how the church, when the church becomes engaged, how it can be a game changer in this incredibly serious and debilitating thing called mental illness. And I'm going to give you 6 action steps that I believe every single church can do, no matter their size or location, whether you have a church of 50 people in a rural community or you're in a large city like San Antonio. There are things that we believe every church can do, and what it will do, if you'll pay attention to these things and begin to apply them, is you will become part of a game-changing movement for people living with mental illness. But I want to start with why I believe that the church should be involved in caring for people with mental illness, and there's 3 reasons. The first is a very practical reason. But let's just be honest, if those of you are from the faith community, you're a pastor, you're a church leader, you're a member in a church, of a local church, it would really be easy to think, well, that's just something that the government should do, or that's something that the mental health community could do. What could a church possibly do, and why should a church get involved in caring for people living with mental illness? Especially for pastors and church leaders, there's so many other responsibilities on your plate as a church leader. You've got to make sure that there's an age-graded curriculum for the children. You've got to make sure that there's a great worship experience every weekend as people come to your community. So why should mental health? That should be something maybe off in the corner, or something you need to do when you've got all the other things figured out. And I want to tell you that there's a very practical reason why every faith community should be caring for people living with mental illness. You've heard a lot of statistics, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I just want to reiterate that according to the Center for Disease Control, 50% of Americans will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. Whoa. That's big. That means that it's real, it's true, that there are people not just out there, but you know somebody who's living with a mental illness, you love somebody with a mental illness, or you yourself are living with a mental illness. 50% according to the Centers for Disease Control. Half of all chronic mental illness begins by the age of 14. Our Matthew was 7. He probably would have been diagnosed sooner if we had understood that children can have a mental illness. We didn't even realize that children could be mentally ill. We knew that there was something different about him. We knew that there were things wrong, but it never occurred to us that mental illness was behind so many of his struggles. But his began before the age of 14, like half of all chronic mental illness. 1 in 5 children will have a mental illness by the age of 18. 90% of people who die by suicide also had a mental illness. You probably heard this one in your statistics. 1/3 of those who abuse alcohol, or half of all those who abuse drugs, also have a mental illness. 25% of the people living in our homeless shelters are mentally ill, and 22 veterans die every day by suicide. Those are staggering statistics. Those are very practical reasons why every church, every synagogue, every mosque, every person in the faith community must care for people who are living with mental illness. And what we've discovered at Saddleback is that when we've surveyed our pastoral care team, those who are actually interacting with people who call in with crises or needing some sort of help, that 23% of those who come to our church asking for help, or are already our members asking for help, 23% of them also have some sort of a mental illness. So then you have to ask the question, is there a role for the church in caring for people with mental illness? Absolutely. Practical need for caring for people with a mental illness. The second reason I would say is there's a biblical reason. If you know anything at all about Scripture, you know that God reveals himself consistently throughout Scripture as a God of compassion. The Bible talks about him as the God who hears the cries of his people. He heard the cries of his people Israel when they were in slavery. In Psalm, King David says over and over, hear my cry, hear my prayer. Hagar was married to Abraham. You know that story at all. And when there was a lot of turmoil in their family, and when she ended up on the outs and was out in the desert by herself with her child abandoned, she said that God was the God who sees her. God is a God who notices those who are suffering, those who are in pain. So God reveals himself as a God of compassion. And then when Jesus came And Colossians 1:15 says that Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. So this God who had said he was a God of compassion in the Old Testament, now we see it in front of us through Jesus. We see what it means that there's a God of compassion because of the way that Jesus loved and cared for those who were sick, those who were marginalized, those who were hurting. And then Jesus said, and I want you to love other people the same way that I have loved you. The way that God has heard your cries and has noticed your pain, the way that I embody that and the way that I minister to physical people and their needs, I want you as my followers to do exactly the same thing. So there's a scriptural reason for the church, for the faith community to be involved in caring for people with mental illness. And then there's a historical reason. I don't know if you know this or not, but it was Christians who started hospitals. Governments did not start hospitals thousands of years ago. Churches started hospitals. They were the first ones to care for the ill in a very serious and cohesive and comprehensive way. So there's this historical pattern of churches, of the faith community, people who call themselves believers in God, believers in Jesus Christ, as being the ones who will stand on the front lines and be the voice, be the hands and feet for those who are suffering. Our faith is a teaching and healing faith. So to be like God, to be like Jesus, to be the way that he's always asked us to be, we have to do those. And because it was the faith community, because it was churches who started hospitals, I built an acrostic using the word church to tell you what I believe those practical steps of what every church can do for people who are living with mental illness. Now, if you're really serious about engaging the people living with mental illness in your congregation or in the community here in San Antonio, wherever it is you live, you need to know that this is not just for the professionals. This is for what a church can do. And we talk about at Saddleback that we've built our mental health ministry on a crawl, walk, run strategy. Because there are some things that I'm going to tell you that every single church can do. As I said, whether you have 50 people or 500 or 5,000, they don't cost any money. They don't take any particular training. They really just require the decision of the will. Those are crawl steps that every church can do. And then there's some walk steps that I'm going to tell you that with a little bit of training and maybe a little bit of money allotted to it, there's some things that almost every church could do. The first, the crawl steps, anybody can do. The walk steps, almost anybody can do. And the run steps are obviously going to be a little more complicated, take maybe some staff, maybe take a little more budget money, but they're things that some churches can do. So if you're going to think about starting a mental health ministry in your church, look at it first from that crawl. What is it that is not going to require any money, doesn't require any particular training, doesn't require any staff? And then those of you, maybe your church is a little bit larger, a little more willing to get involved, think about what could we do if we just got a little bit of training and we're willing to give a little bit of the budget money toward this. And then those of you who are in larger congregations, you can run. I mean, you can soar. There are so many things you can do if you are willing to dive into this issue and in a practical way. So this acrostic, if you're taking notes, it'll help you stay awake if you take notes. So if you're feeling sleepy, pull out your paper, start taking notes. It'll help you keep awake. The first thing in this C, this acrostic based on the word church, is that every church can care for and support people living with mental illness and their families. This just requires an intentional and a deliberate decision to care for people who are living with mental illness. See, often people who are living with mental illness feel excluded from their biological family. A lot of bridges get burned if you are a person who has mental illness, particularly as it ebbs and flows. There are a lot of relational things that happen, and sometimes even though families want so desperately to support their loved one living with a mental illness, and friends want to be there when things are going badly, sometimes those bridges get burned. And so when there is not a biological family to care for, where do people go? Where do people go? It's not the government's job to care emotionally, to give love to people who are suffering. It is not the job of the medical community per se to give love to people who are struggling with mental illness, but it is in the mandate, in the purview of the church to give love and compassion to people who are living with mental illness. frequently we use the excuse, but we're not a big church. Of course, you at Saddleback, that's a big church. I mean, of course you can have a mental health care ministry. But what I'm telling you is that it doesn't cost a penny to care. It doesn't cost a cent to have a heart of compassion. It doesn't require having 50 staff members to decide that your church is going to become a warm and welcoming and safe and embracing place for people and their families who are living with mental illness. It does have a cost, but it's the cost of letting go of selfishness. It's the cost of letting go of self-interest, of self-absorption. There is a cost to caring for people with mental illness, but it's not necessarily or automatically monetary. It requires a decision for us to move past apathy and ignorance and move with our arms open in compassion and friendship to those who are living with mental illness. I call it radical friendship. I read a book a year ago that completely has changed my life. I read this book, I reread it, I keep it on my bedside table, and I read it again. It's called Resurrecting the Person. Friendship and the Care of People Living with Mental Illness. If you are clergy, you must read this book. It's by Professor John Swenton from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. You must read this book. This book has revolutionized my thoughts. He talks about how in Western culture, our idea of friendship is about an inch deep. That we form friendships, and if you think about the people that you would call your friends in your life, most of them, you were attracted to them, first of all, because they were likable. Hey, you know, you seem really nice, you seem really outgoing, you seem like a good person, maybe we can be friends. Or we base our friendship based on things that we have in common. Hey, you like baseball? I like baseball. You like quinoa? I like quinoa. Let's go to lunch. I mean, we base our friendships on how likable someone is and how much we share in common. And if you think about your friendships, most of them are really only about an inch deep because they're based on very surface things. That level of friendship will not often carry you through the dark times, through the times when the bottom falls out, when the wheels fall off the bus, when you have a mental health crisis, when your family goes through a tragedy. If the friends that you have are really only your friends because you're likable, you like each other, or you have things in common, that's not going to be enough for when life hits you in the face. And people living with mental illness go through crises, and when their friendships are only based on those kinds of things, sometimes they might not be particularly likable if they're going through a crisis, and you may have nothing in common with them. But what John Swenton says is that that's not even what friendship is about. If you look in the Bible, in the way that Jesus, in John 15:15, Jesus had an opportunity to define the way that he looks at us, how he feels about us. And in John 15:15, Jesus said, I no longer call you slaves or servants. I call you friends. Well, man, if you've been radically friended by Jesus Christ, you have been friended. It has nothing to do with the kind of likes that we do on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat and all that stuff. Those kind of friendships, when you heart somebody, those of you who do social media, you know, when you heart somebody, you like it. That has nothing to do with the kind of friendship that God calls his people to give to those of us in this world who are in such desperate need of friendship. And so when you as a congregation, when you as a particular faith community decide to get serious about friendship, it's going to be based on the kind of friendship that Jesus gave to us. Because when Jesus came and friended me, there was not a lot that was likable about me. There was not a lot that we had in common. I was going this way, he was going that way. But God, Romans 5:8 says, while we were still thumbing our nose at him, still basically saying, God, I don't, get out of here. I don't care about you, whatever. In that exact moment, in our weakest moments, in our darkest moments, when we were as far away as we would ever be from him, Jesus died for us so that we could be friends of God. And that's the kind of friendship that he asks us to give back to those living with mental illness. Not the friendship of, well, I'll be there if you're doing okay. But you know what? If the wheels fall off the bus and you go through a crisis or you have an episode or you have a relapse, I'm out of here. It costs nothing but a heart of compassion to decide that we're going to care for people living with mental illness. Luke 6:36, Jesus said, "You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate." Well, the H in this acrostic, the first H, is to help with the basic needs of people living with mental illness and their families. Because we have a mandate from God to care for the physical, emotional, spiritual, relational needs of people, as Matt Stanford has already just talked about a few sessions ago, about caring for people holistically in all the dimensions of who we are. Because that is our mandate, to care for people in that holistic way. It means that we're going to take care of their physical needs if they're living with a mental illness. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, people fell all over themselves to bring us meals, to take me to a doctor's appointment, to take care of my children, to make sure that my physical and emotional needs were met. But I have a feeling that if in your congregation today someone says to the elders or the deacons or the powers that be or whomever, and they say, "I was just diagnosed with bipolar disorder this week," I feel pretty sure that nobody said, "Hey, can I bring meals to your family this week? Hey, is there a doctor visit that you're making next week that I could go with you? Is there something, can I watch your kids while you go to your therapy appointment?" Why is it that we treat mental illness differently? Why is it that we treat mental illness as though it's something over here and it's something to be ashamed of? We'll talk about this in a little bit, but also later this afternoon when we talk about stigma. But mental illness is an illness. And it requires the same level of care, meeting physical needs of people living with mental illness. A crawl step, I'm too excited here. Let me go back for 1 second. A crawl step, I kind of froth at the mouth at this because it is my passion. Back on that idea of what you could do practically for caring for people, what does it cost if you pray for people in your service who are living with mental illness? I'll never forget the first time that Rick prayed in a corporate worship and mentioned depression and bipolar and eating disorder and schizophrenia and anxiety. When he prayed for people in our congregation, there were people that swarmed to him afterwards with tears running down their faces saying, "I never thought that my church would understand this real struggle that I'm living with. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning this. Thank you for praying for us publicly." Doesn't cost anything. What does it cost for a pastor to preach a message on mental illness? Nothing. It doesn't cost anything. What does it cost to invite NAMI to hold one of their 12-week free family-to-family workshops at your church? Nothing. There are things that you can do on that, showing that compassion. Well, when it comes to these practical needs, things that you could do, what does it cost to take a meal to somebody who was just diagnosed with a mental illness or is suffering a relapse or is just having a rough week? Doesn't cost anything. It takes a little more effort to become what I would call a companion. What if you had people in your church who decided that they had a heart for people living with mental illness? They didn't really know a whole lot about it, but they decided that, you know what, every weekend I am available to sit with people. You know, sometimes people walk into your church and you go, "Oh, it's really clear, they're struggling." It's just clear. You know that they're struggling with a mental illness. Sometimes it's not that apparent. But what if it's somebody who's so obvious? And what do most people do? They avoid, they walk away, they move one chair over. What if you had a group of people who said, "I'm not going to move one chair over. In fact, I'm going to move one chair closer"? What if there were people in your church who said, "I will be the one, you come find me because I will sit with that person and I will make sure that every week when they come to church, there's a friendly face ready to welcome, to companion with them." Deuteronomy 15:7 in the Message paraphrase says, "When you happen on someone who's in trouble or needs help among your people with whom you live in this land that God, your God, is giving you, don't look the other way pretending you don't see him. Don't keep a tight grip on your purse." 1 John, yeah, that one's kind of 1 John 3:17 says, "If you see some brother or sister in need, and you have the means to do something about it, but you turn a cold shoulder and do nothing, what happens to God's love? It disappears, and you made it disappear." I don't care if all you have is a can of soup in your cupboard. If you have one can of soup that you could share with someone else, you have something to give. You don't have to be wealthy or affluent or middle class. This is for every person. If you have a cracker, share the cracker. It doesn't matter. Share with people and meet their physical needs. The U in this acrostic stands for utilize volunteers. The Bible teaches in Ephesians and Romans, several different 1 Corinthians, where it talks about the spiritual gifts that God has given to those people who are part of his fellowship, those believers in Jesus Christ. It says, every one of you have been given a gift so that you can build up the body of Christ, so that you can do something practical, meeting the needs of other people. So if every member is actually a minister, see, we think it's the pastor or the minister or the rector who is supposed to do the ministry. That is not true at all. You and I are to be ministers. The paid professionals are to equip us to do the work of the ministry. So if every one of us is in actuality a minister, there's something that each of us can do. And every church can train and mobilize members to do the ministry. Listen, workers or mental health case workers, there will never be enough professionals in this world to take care of the depth of the mental illness in our country and in the world. So if there'll never be enough professionals, how can the church be a game changer? This is an incredible opportunity for us to move in and fill in the gaps that the professionals will never be able to do. So every church could take seriously this idea of training and mobilizing people. Churches have the largest volunteer base in the world. There are more than 2.3 billion Christians on planet Earth. That's a lot of volunteers, folks. That's a lot of volunteers. It's bigger than the Peace Corps. It's bigger than any other nation, any other country. There are more people who claim the name of Jesus Christ. And in fact, many of you are sitting here today and you are volunteers. Organizations are always in need of volunteers. The church has built-in volunteers looking for something meaningful to give their lives to. Some of the things, well, let me just tell you. 1 Peter 4:10 says God has given gifts to each of you. From his great variety of spiritual gifts, manage them well so that God's generosity can flow through you. 2 Corinthians 1:4 from the Message says, God comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and then he brings us alongside someone else who is going through hard times so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. Volunteers in your church can be trained and equipped to offer the same kind of love and comfort that God has given to them. R is to remove the stigma. Oh, I got ahead of myself again. Let me tell you some crawl things that you can do. You as a volunteer in a church could compile, you could go through the phone book, go through the computer, make a list of all the mental health agencies or resources in your community so that when somebody walks in and says, my family is in a mental health crisis and we don't even know where to begin, we don't even know where to start, some amazing volunteer in your church has already compiled a list. Because you know what, if you're in a crisis and you have to go to the internet and try to figure this stuff out, that place is a bottomless pit. You can't get to the bottom of the internet. You can't get to the bottom of all the information. And when you're going through a hard time, it's overwhelming to try to find help. But if you go to your church, you go to your synagogue, you go to your mosque, and somebody there has already taken the time and the trouble to compile a list, and they go, you know what, I see there's this place right here that's really close to where you live. This might be a good resource for you. That's something a volunteer could do. Volunteers could start collecting books on mental illness and organize a church library. That's a walk step. Your church, if you could do a run step, maybe you could start a food pantry in ways that would meet the practical needs of people in your community. All right, now the R, to remove the stigma surrounding mental illness. Like I said, we'll cover this even more this afternoon in a panel, but the stigma surrounding mental illness is profound, and it is deeply ingrained in our culture, and unfortunately, even in the church. And sometimes, in fact, often, those living with mental illness bear the brunt of our society's stigmatizing attitudes about fear and exclusion and disgust. And not only is that unbiblical and unjust, it's lethal. People who are living under stigma don't seek help. People living under the stigma of mental illness isolate. They hide. Families hide what's going on with their loved ones because of the fear of stigma. And when you isolate or when you're afraid to get help, let me tell you something. It's not just that life becomes miserable. It can kill. People with untreated mental illness often take their lives. It's important, it's vital that the church not be another one of those stigmatizing places for people with mental illness or their families. One of the most powerful gifts that is within the reach of all of us is to be a safe person, to say my church, our congregation, my life, my friends, we're not going to be a part of that anymore. That's not our language, that's not the way we operate, that's not the way we practice, and stigma will not be practiced here. What does it cost to remove the stigma? Nothing. It doesn't cost a penny. Your church can be a part of removing the stigma for people living with mental illness. How many staff members does it take to push down the barriers that keep people from feeling loved and cared for? It doesn't take a single staff member. It doesn't cost a thing. It requires no effort. As a crawl step that you could take, as I said, you could, if you're a pastor or a Bible study leader or a small group leader, you could talk about mental illness. You can bring it up. You can say, what does the Bible have to say about it? How did Jesus respond to people who were ill? How did God respond to people who were suffering? You can do that. It's simple. It's in the reach of everybody. If you want to take a walk step, you could start to Celebrate Recovery. Celebrate Recovery is a Christian 12-step program that started at Saddleback 25 years ago. CelebrateRecovery.com. You can look it up for anybody with a hurt and a habit and a hang-up. Also mental illness. And with just a tiny bit of training, you could offer life-giving help to people with mental illness. If you wanted to take a run step, which is one of the things we're working on right now at Saddleback, is to create a day program for people in our congregation who live with severe mental illness. Maybe they're disabled by it. They're not really able to work. They're not really able to have much of a life, but they're lonely. I mean, they can only be in their therapist's office once or twice a week. They can only call their therapist a few other times and have them return the call. They often have no relationships. Those friendships have been abandoned. But to have a day program where there's something every single day, they can volunteer, they can serve, but it's in an atmosphere that does not trigger the mental illness that is affecting them and debilitating them. Art, music, friendship, hang out, chill, beauty, things that restore the soul. Romans 15:7 says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you. Just as Christ accepted you. The second C in this acrostic is to collaborate with the community, which is exactly what is happening right here. That is the beauty of what is going on here. There is a collaboration between all the different parts of the community. The church cannot do it all. Please don't think that I think for a minute that the church is the absolute solution to the mental health crisis in our world, but it is an integral part, and the church must have a seat at the table. The church must do its part, but the church must also reach outside of its walls to the community where there is expertise already developed and access that. So many churches are afraid to reach out into the community and ask for community help as though somehow that's really scary and I don't know what's going to happen and what if they say this or they say that. And it's nonsense. We have to, if we really want to tackle, if we really want there to be a game-changing moment in history for mental illness, it will require that the church reach into the community and then the community believe that the faith community has something to offer. We both have something to do. So what you could do, see, because we believe that we're whole beings and we need therapeutic and emotional and physical and spiritual support in order to manage illness, as Matt Stafford was saying, you can't manage mental illness from only one dimension. You have to manage it in every dimension. If you see a psychiatrist but you don't get spiritual support, you're going to leave some issues unaddressed. If you try to faithfully take your medication while you're homeless on the street, it's probably not going to work very well. Being in a support group without also attempting to reconcile broken family relationships can hinder growth. Those living with mental illness need assistance on every level. So access what the community has already become an expert at. Churches can easily build, as I said, a resource list of the hospital programs, of the food banks, of housing referrals. Housing is one of the greatest needs for people living with mental illness. You know, San Antonio, why don't you take this up? Why don't you take up the homeless idea and those with mental illness? Why doesn't the church take the forefront, take the lead in this? Because you know what? People living with mental illness often get in very substandard. If there's housing, it's substandard. Substandard housing. And how do you, would you want it for you? I mean, so often we tell people, here, you can live in the park. Or here, you can live in this substandard housing. Is that what you would want for yourself? Or your child? Or your husband? Or your wife? Or your granddaughter? No, why are we so content to offer people solutions that we wouldn't want for ourselves or those we love? Why are we content with that? Told you I get a little passionate about this. It's one of the things we're trying to crack this nut at Saddleback. We don't have it figured out. I don't want to pretend that we do. We don't have it figured out, but we are working on this because we know housing is critical for people living with mental illness. So a crawl step would be to invite a mental health professional. Maybe there's nobody in your church that feels competent or qualified to talk about mental illness. Okay. There are so many competent professionals in your community that you could invite who would come and talk about mental illness, talk about how it is an illness, how it's not a character flaw, but that it is a mental illness. So many mental health professionals are already there. As a walk step, maybe you could host a half-day training at your church for your children's care workers so that somebody who works with children in the mental health community could come talk about children's needs. You could host a half-day event for that. If you're a larger church, maybe you could have a one-day that's open to the community where you invite several mental health professionals to come and talk to the community. There's so many things you can do to access it. Proverbs 13:16 says, every prudent man acts out of knowledge. If you don't know much about mental illness, learn. It's not that hard to do. There are people that were willing to help you. Then the last H is to offer hope. I love that the name of this conference is Pathway to Hope, because with Jesus Christ as our wounded healer, the church can offer something that nobody else can offer. Nobody can offer hope like the Church of Jesus Christ. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, it is not the responsibility of our government to offer hope to people living with mental illness. It's not the medical healthcare profession's primary responsibility to offer hope to people, but it is the church's responsibility to not only offer love and practical assistance, but to offer hope. And nobody is a better hope purveyor than the Church of Jesus Christ, because we offer hope not only for this life, and there's so much hope that we can offer for this life, but we offer the hope of the life that is to come. So we address the hope for now and for later. Nobody can do that but the Church of Jesus Christ. And through the promises of God, we know how to do this. So many people with mental illness, as I've said, and I'll say it, and I'll say it, and I'll say it, they feel abandoned, they feel forsaken, they feel completely out of touch, they feel like they don't fit in this world, they feel like they don't fit in society, they don't fit in their family, they don't fit in at work, they don't fit. The church is their last hope of finding a place where they fit. And the good news is that's exactly what the church is supposed to be. That's exactly what the church is supposed to offer. A place of hope, a place of belonging, a place of fitting in, a place where people love you on your good days and on your bad days, a place where you don't have to hide your diagnosis, a place where you don't have to be ashamed that you're struggling, a place where you don't have to pretend, a place where you don't have to whisper. When I was an HIV advocate, God has shifted me to mental health and mental illness. But before my son died, I spent 10 years as an advocate for people living with HIV and AIDS and for orphans and vulnerable children. And sadly, I got used to, as I would travel here in the United States and around the world, having people come up to me and whisper in my ear, I'm HIV positive, or I'm living with AIDS. I got used to that because they whispered the stigma was so great. You can lose your job, you can lose your marriage, you can lose your life. You can lose everything if you say that you're HIV positive in many places around the world. But what I was unprepared for was now as a person who is an advocate for people living with mental illness, and I travel and I go to places like this, or I speak in churches, and people come up, and now what they whisper to me is, I'm living with depression. I'm living with anxiety. I have schizophrenia. I have an eating disorder. They are whispering their diagnoses because the shame and the stigma is so great. Nobody should ever have to whisper anything about their lives at church. That is the one place in our world that should be safe to talk about your life. And we can offer that hope. The church has a message to give to people living with mental illness, and it says, you are loved. There is a purpose for your life. You belong. You have a choice. Yes, you didn't choose to have mental illness, but within that illness, there are choices that you can make to get into treatment, to get clean and sober, to try one more time, to decide you're going to live one more day, that you're going to wait and see what it is that God might be up to in your life. There are choices within mental illness, and that you are needed. When people feel like they have something to give back, that they're not just a consumer of commodity, that they're not just a consumer of our compassion. See, what happens is in this friendship, I am not asking you to become friends to people living with mental illness. I am asking you to become a friend with people with mental illness, because a friend with is a very different thing than a friend to. A friend to somebody says, I'm better than you, I've got my act together, I know what's going on. If you'll just watch me and be like me, then you too can be cool and wonderful and whole and healthy. But a friend to someone with mental illness is you say, you know what, I'm broken too. I struggle. I live with depression. I know what it's like. I live with anxiety. I am a friend to you. I am with you in your pain and your sorrow. And this is what the church can do. Matt Stanford also referred to this verse, Hosea 2:15, where God says, I will transform the valley of trouble into a gateway of hope. How will he do it? He will do it through me. He will do it through you. As we, as the church, decide that we're going to care for people living with mental illness. We're going to help with their practical needs. We're going to train and utilize volunteers. We're going to remove the stigma. We're going to collaborate with the community, and we're going to offer hope. When we take that as our responsibility, then we become a doorway of hope for millions of people who desperately need it. Thank you. God bless you.
As we said from the very beginning, when we tried to put this conference together and we called people and said, would you come to San Antonio, Kay was maybe the first person we called because we knew her message, and we just want to give her an incredible thank you for being here. And some of it, we're gonna go to lunch, and Carol's gonna tell us more about that. But some of the things that Kay talked about that churches can do, that we can do individually, we're gonna focus on after lunch in some of these workshops. We're gonna have people tell us how you can get involved in helping provide housing that works for people living with a mental illness. NAMI classes, how you can get NAMI classes at your church, how you can begin support groups, and other topics. And really, that's what the intent of this conference is, to have a conversation, but also to leave everybody here with things that we can walk away and we can put into action like Kay was talking about.
Absolutely.